Later in the Build topical debate on BBC One, it's another virtual question time with Fiona Bruce.
Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, James Cleverly, Brexit Minister under Theresa May, Chairman of the Conservative Party under Boris Johnson, now Minister for the Middle East and North Africa at the Foreign Office. Joining us down the line from Wigan, Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary and a candidate in the recent contest to become party leader, Lisa Nandy. Munira Wilson, elected as an MP last December, a former tax consultant. He went on to work for a children's charity and for the NHS, currently the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for health and social care. Steve Parish, a businessman and football fan who helped save Crystal Palace from financial ruin in 2010 and is now part owner and chairman of the club. And former hospital doctor turned TV writer, responsible for massive hits such as Line of Duty and Bodyguard, and for keeping us all on the edge of our seats, Jed Mercurio. Good evening. Welcome to my guests here in the studio, and of course to Lisa joining us down the line from Wigan, and to our virtual audience. Thank you all for coming tonight. You are all from Plymouth. Thank you very much for joining us for the programme tonight. And of course, thank you to you at home for joining us on the programme too. And if you want to join in the conversation on social media, at BBC Question Time. That's how to do it. So let's hear what you've got to say. And let's hear our first question tonight, which is from Charlie Shrimpton.
What does it tell us about the government's priorities that they were forced into a U-turn by footballer Marcus Rashford so that the poorest people in the country, and especially children, would be fed over the summer holidays?
So obviously talking about the free school meal vouchers for children. James?
Well, coronavirus has meant that we have had to bring about an unprecedented range of support packages for individuals, for businesses, for the self-employed, and indeed for families.
Yes, we weren't going to do this until Marcus Rashford spoke.
And we'd already supported families to help feed their children during the Easter break. And ultimately, we're trying to get back to a more normal way of working. And we had hoped that we would not need to put this additional support package in place over the summer. But we do listen. The government did listen. And Marcus put forward a really compelling argument. And we did listen. And the government decided to extend the existing scheme into the summer holidays. I think it was the right thing to do. And ultimately, what we're trying to do, as I say, is we're trying to get back towards normality, because really that's what everyone wants, and that's what we're working towards.
Jed?
Well, firstly, I think we all want to pay tribute to Marcus Rashford for the campaign. You know, what a great example this young man is, as well as being a fantastic footballer. And I say that as a Manchester United fan, so maybe I'm biased. But what I would also say is that I sometimes despair of hearing things called U-turns. I think it stops people in positions of authority from listening and changing their minds and responding to the democratic force that got behind Marcus's campaign. And sometimes I worry that if we use that type of language, it sometimes makes it more difficult for governments to do the right thing, and I would definitely say that it's something that we should all welcome, the fact that the government listened and acted in the way that it has.
And Charlie, you're a teacher. What was your response?
But Jed, if you use language such as U-turn, or if you do the right thing in the first place, you will not need to use that language at all. And my experience is that I see every day how these vouchers make an impact. And the difference of a child having a meal and coming to school is far greater than not having a meal at all. And it gives them the opportunity to be able to flourish. And for that, there is no price.
Steve?
Well, firstly, I'd agree with Jed. I mean, I think that Marcus Rashford is an example, as of lots of footballers have been through this crisis, of people that know the right thing to do the right thing to do, and act in the right way. I'd also agree with Jed that I think the language of U-turns and all of this kind of the brickbats that we throw at politicians often means that we just don't get to the right answer, and what's important is we get to the right answer. So I'm pleased that we did. I think it's the right thing. I'm pleased that Marcus showed our profession in the light that I see it in every day. And long may it continue, and long may the government, any government that we have, continue to listen to the right arguments and make the right decisions.
And one of the things that was so compelling about Marcus Rashford was talking about his own experience of poverty as a child and going to friends' houses when food was short in his own home. Are there other footballers that you know that have lived that kind of life experience?
The vast majority of footballers, come from, backgrounds that wouldn't be considered affluent. And what a lot of people don't realise is what an extended network of people they look after and are responsible for, particularly many of the players that come from overseas. So, the picture that's portrayed of footballers as being sort of young men with too much money just really isn't fair in most of the cases that I come into contact with. And certainly I've been incredibly proud of all of the players that I know and the way they've acted through the whole crisis.
So, Lisa, the question from Charlie is, what does it tell us about the government's priorities that was forced into this decision by Marcus Rashford?
Well, I agree with Jed. I think I very much welcome the fact that the government did a U-turn on this. And I think the campaign that Marcus Rashford led was really inspirational. But it shouldn't take a brave young footballer to shame the government into action. The real question is, how could we possibly, only 48 hours ago, have still been debating whether we were going to allow some children to go starving hungry over the school holidays? And even on the day that we had that vote in the Houses of Parliament that Labour had called, and that the day that the government decided to U-turn, the Prime Minister was at the dispatch box denying the existence of 600,000 children who've been pushed into poverty since 2012, and the fact that that is projected to rise. Now, this is a result of an approach to government that has systematically stripped support away from children over the last decade, so that now schools in my constituency have to employ workers using the pupil premium to go around to children's houses, stock their cupboards, put money in the gas or electricity meter, and deal with rats and mice because the parents just simply don't have enough money to make ends meet. So when James says, let's get back to normal, I say let's get back to a new normal and build a better country based on better values when we come out the other side of this. These children have been last up to now and they've been invisible. Let's make sure that when we rebuild this country, let's change that and let's make sure that they come first.
Belinda, I was just watching you there nodding your head along to what Lisa was saying.
Sorry, yes, looking at the root of the question that Charlie asked, in terms of what does it say about the government, and like you say, it took such a high-profile footballer for that to happen. If we're responding to coronavirus, and I admit there's millions that have been ploughed into this, in order to get to that new normal, how can we trust that the government is going to make those decisions without having the intervention?
Munira?
Well, in 2020 in the United Kingdom, no child should be going hungry. And the fact that it's taken a footballer to help the government to realise that and actually change its policy, I think is shameful, frankly. It's not a new issue, holiday hunger. We know that several billion children suffer from holiday hunger normally, and that's obviously exacerbated by the crisis that we face.
And were the Lib Dems pushing to extend the free school meal voucher system? Yes, we've been calling
for this for many weeks. And in fact, in Wales, we have a Liberal Democrat education secretary, and she had committed to funding school meals through the summer some time ago. So this is something we'd been pushing for, and indeed so had the Labour Party and a number of other opposition parties. So we're hugely grateful to Marcus Rashford, of whom I'm a huge fan, and I wish we were watching him in the Euro 2020 at the moment, but we find ourselves in these circumstances, and I'm, as I say, I'm grateful that he's forced the government to make this change, and so will many millions of children across the country be.
Is it a bit tricky, James, that for the days running up to the government's change of heart on this, you had cabinet minister after cabinet minister saying, no, we're absolutely not going to change our mind about this. We're funding money through local councils. We're absolutely not going to change our mind. And then Marcus Rashford pops up, and that's the thing that makes the difference.
Well, it is worth remembering that this is a scheme that we had already put in place. We're talking about extending an existing scheme. And it's also worth remembering that the unprecedented circumstances that we find ourselves in has meant that the government have put forward a range of support packages at a scale that we have never seen before in British politics. So we are absolutely determined to make sure that families can put food on their table. That's why we're supporting people who are furloughed at the moment. Okay. We are working so hard to get through this unbelievably difficult sets of circumstances, and ultimately we're trying to balance the competing financial and social pressures, and sometimes when someone shines a light on a particular issue and we look again at it and we make the decision that this is something that we can extend and should extend through the summer. And I'm very, very grateful that Marcus did that. I'm very grateful we listened. I'm very grateful that we responded.
OK, let's take another question now from Deborah Norris.
Good evening, everyone. Is a delay in learning of 6 months genuinely devastating to a whole generation, as was suggested by Sir Michael Wilshaw, the former head of and Chief Inspector of Schools?
Jed, devastating for a whole generation?
I think the problem with sending kids back to school and the delay is something that we should all be concerned about. I think that the fact is that the time that children spend in school at a vulnerable age is precious time, and I think it will be very, very hard for them to catch up. So I think that definitely more should have been done in terms of the planning. I think that there has been a failure of planning to get children back into school. I think that obviously the pandemic arrangements have put an enormous strain on the infrastructures in our society. But I also think that if you look at what is required for children to go back to school, it's not just the fact that children need to go back to school, it's that society needs those children back into school because of all the things that surround children being in school, not requiring childcare and so forth. And I really wish that the government had gone about the planning in a more forthright and more detailed way.
And Deborah, I'm wondering, you're asking the question, I know you're a deputy head teacher. The way you phrase it makes me wonder if you think actually it isn't genuinely devastating or isn't devastating for a generation of children.
It's been absolutely awful. This week, so I work in a secondary school in Plymouth, and we've had our year 10s and 12s back for the first time. And first of all, it's absolutely delightful to see them all. But it's absolutely horrifying that we can't provide more, and they're desperate for it. Attendance this week has been brilliant, and clearly home learning isn't doing the job for them that we need it to do. We haven't got clarity yet on what's going to happen with their exams next year and the assessment. And as school leaders, we are desperate for further guidance about planning for September. And our students are becoming disillusioned at not having that, I think.
Marsha, you have your hand up.
I'm a parent to a year 10 and a year 12 children, and I was wondering whether any consideration is being given to the request for reducing the curriculum content for the GCSEs and A-levels next summer.
Because of all the teaching they'll have missed?
Exactly.
Munira?
Well, I think everybody, whether you're a parent, you're a teacher, a school governor, everybody is desperate to get children back to school. We know the detrimental impact it's having on their well-being as well as on their educational development. But clearly we've got to do that when it's safe.
And the Lib Dems have put a whole range of suggestions in place that have to happen before children go back to school. So you're not in any great rush to get them back?
No, we've put forward a plan which includes things like identifying safe spaces that could then having a safe space register that would open up safe community spaces that could potentially be used as additional space for schooling so that you can then get kids back to school safely. I mean, my concern is, first of all, the test and trace system clearly isn't up and running properly, and for any part of lockdown, whether that's schools or other parts of the economy, to be opened up, we need to be testing, tracing and isolating every single case to keep people safe. The other thing is just the lack of plan. As Jed was saying, I would have hoped that there would have been a plan put forward with a range of scenarios perhaps, and certainly I was talking to head teachers in my constituency on Wednesday and they said to me, we urgently need a plan so that we can start to prepare for September. So that we know what we're doing, but we need that now.
Well, let's see if we can find out what the plan is. We've got James here.
One thing I just would like to add is that a lot of parents feel like they haven't had a voice in this debate, and there's been this big blame game going on between government and the unions. And the reason why we ended up with a slight change of guidance for primary schools was because there was a lack of engagement and lack of communication between government and schools and unions to understand what was workable.
So what is the plan, James?
Well, I've got 2 boys at school. My eldest has just finished and unfortunately wasn't able to sit his A-levels. So I know the huge and understandable desire that parents, teaching professionals, the natural desire they have for certainty and clarity. But of course, this is an evolving situation.
But we hear talk of a plan possibly to be announced tomorrow of a tutoring system through the summer or a school summer plan. What can you tell us?
Well, you're going to have to wait to the announcement because that would be the right thing to do. I don't want to steal the thunder of my colleagues from the Department of Education. But the point is that we are evolving the plan as we learn more about the nature of the virus. We've got to make sure that the students are safe, the teaching professionals are safe. And so this will mean that we are having to adapt, and that is disconcerting. It's hugely disconcerting for parents. We completely understand that, but we want to make sure that children don't miss out on their education. Education is incredibly important, and it's not just about the syllabus, it's also about the social interactions. And so we want to make sure that we can re-establish teaching provision in a way that's safe for the students, for the staff, for the teaching professionals, and of course their families.
Isn't it confusing though for parents and students alike when there was a plan announced? If I recall, it was that schools would go back on the 1st of June, and Michael Gove said it was safe for them to go back on the 1st of June, and it was predicated on having, I hate to use the phrase, world-beating test and trace system. There's been a failure to achieve that. We need safety to be achieved through having a functioning test and trace system and low levels of transmission, because it's not just about it being safe for kids to go back to school, it has to be safe for society. They travel, they interact with staff, those staff members interact with people in their households, and possibly the disease can be transmitted to vulnerable people. So there has been a total failure to deliver on the promises, and that's caused a great deal of confusion.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with you on the point you're making about the requirement for test and trace and the planning around that and the delivery of that. We now have a testing system which tests huge numbers of people on a daily basis, hundreds of thousands of people, and that was driven forward. Matt Hancock set himself some incredibly challenging targets to expand that.
I think we might get onto this in more detail in a moment. If that's, No, that's absolutely fine. I just noticed there's some hands up in the audience. So, Tony, you had your hand up.
Yes, hello. One of the things that bugs me about all this is everything comes down to the government has to have a plan. And the government does have to have a plan, but some of the ideas that come through are, frankly, just incomprehensible. I was just listening today to somebody saying, the problem is we don't have enough space. We can open hotels, we can put up marquees, and that way we can get more kids back into school. Great idea, begs the question, where are the teachers? Because we wouldn't have enough teachers to do that, and those teachers we have got, about 40% of them don't want to go back anyway.
Sue.
We all know that education is a great social leveller and a great force for social mobility. And with rising inequality in the UK, the fact that these children, the question was whether 6 months off school is devastating for a whole generation. And for those children who have no access to the internet, have no computers at school, have no books on the bookshelves behind them, these are the children who are particularly suffering from this. And until we have, I'm sorry to repeat it, but effective tracing in place, testing and tracing, we can't get there. We cannot have, like on the Isle of Wight, 90% of those people who are traced disappearing into the ether.
Deborah, you've got your hand up.
Just coming back to James about the points and the vision to get students back into school, which is exactly what we all want. The implementation of some of the policies that the government have suggested haven't necessarily turned out to what they were planned. So the school laptops, for example, our school, our disadvantaged laptops still haven't arrived. And today I know the announcement with the big catch-up plan and the national tutoring programme, in theory, sounds fabulous. In reality, have we got capacity to be able to implement what the government are trying to suggest?
Lisa?
Well, I mean, the question was about trying to about the impact on children, and I think there's no question that this is going to have a big impact on this generation. It's not just about exam results and life chances, as important as that is, but health professionals are increasingly worried that this is having a real impact on children's mental health as well. So for every reason, we ought to be trying to get children back to school as quickly as can safely be achieved. It's why it's been so frustrating to see the government's response to this, entering into this blame game and refusing to work with people to build a national consensus around this. I think we could sort this out pretty quickly, actually. It's a huge effort, and it takes a lot of work to get children back to school safely with the social distancing requirements. But if you think back to when we were trying to get the public health efforts off the ground, and the government did concede that they needed to work with a wide variety of partners, the army was brought in to help construct hospitals. We had people being brought back out of retirement in order to help boost the workforce. We need a similarly comparable effort for education. We've had efforts around health, we've had efforts around the economy, but education has really been the poor relation in this.
But Lisa, is Labour's position slightly... Lisa, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but is Labour's position slightly confusing? You had the Shadow Education Secretary, Rebecca Long-Bailey, saying only last week that it was welcome that the government was rowing back from full school reopening plans before summer.
Well, it's welcome that they're not trying to force schools to reopen when it's not safe to do so. And actually, this is why months ago we were calling for the government to have an exit strategy from lockdown and to start working on that now. Because the countries that have managed to get children back to school more quickly were planning for this several months ago. They've also done a lot more to try and get support to children in the meantime, so that when children do go back to school, we're not dealing with this enormous attainment gap. The government promised laptops and internet connections months ago, but we're just still not seeing them delivered around the country. We had a plan announced today that said that there'd be private tutoring available. Now, I really welcome this, but once again, school leaders have been left wringing their hands saying, why haven't you spoken to us before you announced these plans? We've had enough of back-of-the-envelope plans. We need a proper national strategy and a national consensus. We need the government to reach out and work with schools in order to get our children back to school as quickly as possible.
And Steve, there seems to be an element of some schools kind of ploughing their own furrow. Private schools have been talking over the last couple of days that they're going to get their own kind of app going and that they are committed to getting all children back in school by September.
Well, look, I would say I would agree with Lisa on a lot of things. We don't seem to have a strategy to exit the lockdown in any industry. You know, we've fortunate enough in football that we have the resources and the money to develop our own strategy, and we can test players twice a week, and we have a fairly limited requirement without supporters. This virus most likely will stay with us in this guise for the foreseeable future. We all hope for a vaccine, we hope for better interventions, but we know they're not likely to come. If the lockdown worked, which we all think it did, when we come out of lockdown, infections will rise. And if we can't track those infections down and trace them and quell those outbreaks, we really are in for a terrible time economically. And coming back to the original question, I would say that there will be limited damage done to everything if we can get back to as close to normal as possible by September. But if we don't get back to as close to normal as September, our children, our businesses, our children's future will be damaged for maybe 10, 15 years. So the next 2 or 3 months are such a crucial period. It does require everybody to stop the blame game. It requires a massive, massive national effort and a can-do mentality and attitude that worries me we seem to have lost in this country. And if we don't do that, I think we really are in serious problems.
Well, look, you've mentioned it, and you mentioned it as well, Jed, in terms of contact tracing and that being a method for moving us all forward. We've got a question on that, so let's come to it. Gareth Jones.
Good evening. The current app development is experiencing problems. If we don't get it working, does it really matter? Will it make a difference to prevent a second wave?
Does it really matter, Lisa Nandy?
Yeah, I think it does matter, and we, very much supported the government in trying to set this up, because in the end, if you get the app up and running, it will save lives. The problem is that the government were warned repeatedly from the outset that the path that they were taking was not going to work because the technology just wasn't compatible with a lot of phones. Now, there were other countries like Germany and Australia who were taking a similar path to our government, trying to develop their own technology, realised that it wouldn't work, listened to those warnings, and actually went down a different path. And as a result, Germany has just managed to launch their app yesterday and is quite confident about how that's going to work. So we've really got to start breaking the pattern here, which is of a government that shuts people out, doesn't listen to advice, doesn't seek to learn from expertise here in the UK and overseas, and then finds later that they've got to revisit those plans because they've unravelled very, very quickly. We've seen it over and over again with a whole host of things. One of the real outstanding problems with all of this at the moment is that you've got public health directors across England saying that they still don't get, the GPs in local areas don't get the results of tests because the government set up their own private sector testing facilities around the country. So GPs just simply don't know when their patients are being tested positive for COVID. Public health directors are looking closely at local outbreaks and having to make decisions about managing local outbreaks, but because they're not getting that information, they just simply don't have the tools that they need to do the job. So we need a reset here. It's right for the government to abandon a system if it isn't working, but we need to ask ourselves, why is it so often that we end up having to unravel plans over and over again because we didn't get them right in the first place?
Now, Steve, I wanted to ask you not only what you think about this particular question, but also just tell us a little bit about how you're managing at Crystal Palace, because you've got a kind of app of your own there, haven't you?
Yes, it's not a tracing app. I mean, on the app, it seems incredible to me that so many countries are developing their own app. I mean, I would have thought, certainly if the EU has a purpose, that might be one thing that they could have got everybody's heads together on. We all want exactly the same app doing exactly the same thing, which seems incredible. We have a very simple app where the players and the staff fill in any symptoms because that's as efficient a way of catching the disease early, sometimes as testing, where there can be a lag between the time you test and testing positive. But, developing these apps is extremely complex. As somebody who had a business that developed this kind of thing, the timescales that we're trying to do it in are very, very compressed. I'm pleased today that they're adapting to Google and Apple technology, which, I would hazard a guess they might be better at producing stuff than, people in our government. So, look, let's hope that we can all get together. The blame game on both sides, I think, really does need to stop. It's a very difficult situation. Nobody was prepared for this situation. We can say Germany have done slightly less worse than everybody else. We'll need to look back.
Well, they've done a lot better in terms of their death toll.
They have done better in terms of their death toll, but I think when we look back on this, 10,000 deaths is too many. For this to get to the extent that it did, into the amount of countries that it has, the world really needs to look at it and make sure that these kind of outbreaks are jumped on way before the kind of things we're discussing now, because we are talking about a pandemic that is broadly out of control in the world that we're trying to get on top of, and it is going to be extremely difficult. And we do need to come together as a country, private enterprise, the governments, both sides of the house, and try and find a solution in the next 2 or 3 months, or we really could be in a terrible situation.
Mike, you've had your hand up from the start.
Yes, I was going to say, with Apple and Google, there's good parts in both applications. Surely these companies could come together for once, because there's a big pandemic going on and sort of put the resources together.
Well, I think they are putting their resources together for the benefits of this particular app, as I understand it. Charles?
Yes, it just seems that this is just another moment of government bluster actually hitting reality. So Matt Hancock and Baroness Harding said today that they backed both horses of the Google and the Android model and the NHS app, but they've always insisted until this point that they were only going to pursue the NHS app. So it just seems that the government are trying to make it seem that they're trying to do the best job possible, but when it comes to reality, they want to cover up and not pretend that they've done anything wrong.
Jed?
Well, I think that the app can only really be an adjunct. I think that there are technological limitations in the app in terms of providing a nationwide service. And really, it's about having a functioning public health infrastructure that is able to deal with local outbreaks locally. And unfortunately, the government has chosen to centralise and use a private company, Serco, to take the lead on this. And I think that a lot of public health officials and workers, as Lisa said, are frustrated that they're not receiving the information. They've kind of been shut out, whether intentionally or not, I don't know, but they do feel that they've been shut out, and that does then limit us in terms of our ability to do exactly what we're all asking for. As Steve said, where's that can-do attitude? Can we crush this virus so that society can get back to normal and our kids can get back into school and our businesses can get up and running? And a lot of the businesses and the particular sectors that are looking to get back, frankly, don't have much confidence.
And what about your business? I mean, getting Line of Duty, I say that as an unashamed fan, I have to confess, getting that back up and running.
Well, it's interesting that you give that specific example, because we had an outbreak during the shoot over in Belfast when there was the test and trace system originally, the containment phase, and we were able to deal with that and we were able to carry on uninterrupted. Then towards the end of the shoot that got curtailed, we had another outbreak, and I was quite surprised to learn that we weren't able to do testing and tracing. The system had been stopped. And that was the point where really, when we looked at it, we knew that we couldn't protect our workforce and we had to stop. And that was 9 days before the lockdown. So the writing was on the wall then. And I think a lot of businesses are just going to take responsibility for it themselves. I think that each TV production will organise their own testing and they will look after each other and do their best that way.
James, obviously we had the announcement today from the Health Secretary about switching horses, I think was the analogy Matt Hancock used. But he also said we backed both horses throughout, the NHSX app and also this other app, kind of Google Apple app. What I don't understand about that is if the government has been backing both those things, it's now jettisoned one, why isn't the other one ready?
Well, I mean, these apps, we talk about, I mean, Lisa implies there was an obvious right answer. There clearly wasn't an obvious right answer.
But if you've been backing them both, and other countries are already introducing their apps, how come the other one isn't ready?
So the idea that there was an obvious right answer is wrong. Otherwise, every country in the world would have done the same thing. That's not what happened. Germany, as an example. And what Matt did was exactly the right thing to do, which is not to put all our eggs in one basket, to make sure that we were developing the in-house app, as it were, and the app through third parties.
So how ready is that?
And it was tested on the Isle of Wight, and the decision was made to go with the other option. That's the right thing to do, and it's about learning as we go through this and making the decision. I don't know exactly when the app will go live.
Because we heard it might not be till winter. No.
But so as I say, I don't want to guess and speculate. I don't know exactly when the app will go live, but obviously we will continue working with international friends and partners. We will learn from what other countries are doing, and the whole world is learning as we go, and to make sure that we bring about a test and trace app that can be used to protect us all.
Gareth.
Yeah, do you not think that the public are going to see this as another U-turn again, and it's going to be even harder to get the public on board to actually use the app when it does become live.
But do you worry about that? Loss of public confidence?
No, because I mean,
it's critical,
again, it's one of these things.
work.
We use the word U-turn. I mean, I was in business before I came into politics, and if you're going to test a couple of options, see which one progresses best, see which one works, and then invest your time effort in the better performing one of those options. That's not a U-turn. That's why it was tested on the Isle of Wight.
Okay.
That's why we learn from the experience.
So you have been trialling the other option on the Isle of Wight as well?
Well, no, but the point.
You haven't.
The point that Matt was saying is.
Hang on, I just want to be, because now I really don't understand. So if Matt Hancock said you were backing both options, and you were trialling the NHS app, presumably you were trialling the other one as well. Otherwise, that's what backing both options is.
No, no.
Isn't it?
No, so the test of our in-house app was done on the Isle of Wight. We were keeping our options open for the use of either.
So you haven't trialled the other one?
But the other system is being used more widely. So doing a discrete UK-only trial for that one, my understanding, and I wouldn't.
So we haven't trialled it, but you think about other. You're relying on other countries
because it's being used elsewhere.
Right.
So it's not necessary for us to trial both. But
okay, I've got that clear.
The reason we were trialling is to make sure that we chose the best option, because each option had their advantages and disadvantages, and it was not clear cut at the start of this process that that this would be the better option. That's why you test.
Munira.
I can't overstate how important getting test and trace right and getting it right as quickly as possible is. Everybody who's watching this evening is desperate to try and get back to some sense of normality. Without a robust operational test and trace system, it's impossible to be able to do that safely. We have to be able to find every case and isolate it and keep and suppress this virus. What is very clear to me is when I had a conversation with the Deputy Chief Medical Officer on the 13th of March, it was around then that we stopped routinely testing and tracing every incidence of coronavirus. And I questioned her hard and I said, why are you stopping the testing? We should be testing every case. And it was down to capacity. And it's been far too late. It was some weeks after that we suddenly saw a focus on ramping up testing. And great, we've got the capacity. But James, we haven't had for almost a month now the figures of how many people have actually been tested on a daily basis. And on tracing, as Lisa has said, we need to be working much more closely with local authorities. Directors of Public Health have been crying out to be leading this effort. They are the experts. I didn't watch the Salisbury poisonings earlier this week, but I heard in there it showed just how pivotal the role of the Director of Public Health is. That is what they should be doing. That's what they're experts in. And they should be leading those teams of contact tracers to be tracing every case. But last week I was talking to some leaders in local government. They haven't got the data. They haven't got the tools. They're still, to some extent, unclear about what their roles should be. And this is absolutely critical if we want to open up our economy again.
I think it's telling that you got an honest answer about the reason that testing was abandoned in March. What we were told, the public was told, was that it wasn't appropriate for an economy of our size.
Well, I think our institutions, I feel, we talk about the government all the time letting us down, but, Public Health England made that decision. In Germany, they devolved it very quickly into the local authorities. And I would also say, we can't have the whole of the United Kingdom hanging on an app developer developing an app. Test and trace is possible to do manually. Most of it, Jed, as you said, will happen manually, even with the app. The app is 15 minutes in proximity to 2 metres to somebody.
Yeah, it's just an adjunct.
You can remember if you were with somebody for 15 minutes.
The whole infrastructure, yeah.
So, we need to get test and trace rolled out manually. And if the app comes along and helps us do it, then great. But we can't wait for that.
But it's also about people receiving accurate information. When you have public health officials, when you have government scientists saying things which are manifestly untrue, which is that it wasn't appropriate, it was actually always about resources, but they didn't admit that. And so now we're in a situation again where trust has broken down. People are desperate to get good quality information they can rely on from their government, from their public health officials, so that people can make the right decisions and make the right calculations about risk, about how we get back to normal.
Okay.
I think, Steve, you talked... Sorry,
briefly, because I just want to move on to another
You talked about
question.
ending the blame game. I think the public appreciate that we are in an unprecedented situation and no government is going to get it right. But the thing that frustrates me most about this government is that they just don't have the humility to put their hands up when they've actually got it wrong. Or
when they do that, they
late.
say it's a U-turn. They are holding their hands up and saying they got it wrong, and then they're told it's a U-turn. So then that's not an environment that's conducive to people making the right decisions, is it? That is the blame game. That's exactly what it is.
No, but isn't there a difference between making a U-turn on policy and just lying? There's a difference between those two things.
I certainly think that the information, as you just pointed out, that they've received from some of our institutions and scientists, and I'm not here to defend them blindly. Everybody's made terrible mistakes. You know, where there was a left turn to make, we took the right one in almost every occasion, and we have to learn from it. But I don't think when we look back there'll be any one single reason, you know.
You're absolutely right, Steve.
And I think we have to consider that when we move forward, and that's the most important thing, is how we move forward.
Well,
I don't
but moving
think
forward
that...
involves learning from your mistakes and being honest. And unfortunately, there's that gap between the learning behaviour and the transmission of the information about what has been learned and where mistakes were made. And I think that is problematic for people to have confidence about the information they receive and how they go forward.
OK, I'm going to move on, because we've got another question on a different topic, which I want to get in, from Laura Hill.
Earlier this week, the Prime Minister announced a review into racial inequality in the country. Isn't it time for action rather than just another review?
Munira?
Absolutely, and it was unfortunate that the announcement was buried in a piece about Winston Churchill's statue. People are angry, people are hurting. That's why, despite the fact that we've got a public health emergency and nobody wants to see crowds out on the street, people feel moved to go out and protest, having been outraged by what they've seen happen in the US with George Floyd, but also with the huge inequalities that have been exposed by the virus. We've seen the BAME community disproportionately affected.
So specifically, what action do you think should be taken?
Well, there's already been a whole host of reviews where the recommendations have yet to be implemented, and in terms of the Home Office, ending the hostile environment would be a good place to start, for instance. There's also things like suspicionless stop and search. We know that black individuals are 47 times more likely to be stopped and searched. And I received last week a letter about a 15-year-old mixed-race boy in my constituency. Law-abiding young man. I heard from his head teacher, and he has been stopped countless times by the police. They're convinced it's racial profiling. When he's out, even when he's been out with his white friends, the police have stopped him to question him, but not his white friends. His parents are terrified that at some point he's going to get into more trouble because he's going to react to being stopped. This shouldn't be happening, and there's clearly there are systemic issues that need to be tackled, and that's where David Lammy's review. We're still waiting for some of those recommendations to be implemented. So yes, another review is important, but it shouldn't just be a research project. It should be setting goals and targets and measures for us to be tracking progress against.
I mean, James, I just had a little look through the number of reviews that there have been, and by my counting, anyway, there have been 8 reviews in the last 3 years looking into race or the effect of race as part of a bigger project. Why do you need another one?
Well, reviews are how governments learn about what needs to
but these
change,
were,
what needs to adapt.
Most of them are your government reviews. There have been 8 in the last 3 years.
Yeah, I'm not going to suggest that the government should stop learning and stop understanding. So I'm comfortable with reviews, and actually, I'm also very proud of the fact that I'm part of a government that has made some real differences. So, for example, and I know these figures will now be distorted because of the situation with the coronavirus. But up until that point, the increase in employment had disproportionately benefited people from black and other ethnic minority groups. And having a job, I think we will all agree, is a foundation stone for a better life. We have looked at the impact of stop and search. When I worked with Boris Johnson when he was Mayor of London. We looked at how crime disproportionately affected black Londoners, and he's carried that passion now with him into Downing Street. And it's easy when people say, oh, you know, we should do something. And when asked what exactly we should do, you were unable to give an answer, because it is not simple. And it is not the kind of change that can happen overnight. But I'm incredibly proud of the work that the Prime Minister has done, both as Prime Minister and as Mayor of London, to try and close the gap between the lived experience of ethnic minorities in the UK.
We've got lots
and the norm.
Lots of hands up here, so let's hear from some of them. Marsha.
Can I just say, I think after you've mentioned that there's been 8 reviews, I think reviews aren't enough. It's time now for reform. And I think we should start at least by educating children in school about black culture and black history so that it can start there. I mean, too many people, if you're saying that a 15-year-old was stopped several times by the police and it was racial profiling, that doesn't come from one specific police officer. That comes from the whole attitude of people in general, police officers in general. And they didn't go to the police force with that attitude. I think that came from the way they were brought up or things that they've learned in their lives as they've grown up. I think if people had a different attitude towards black people as they grow up, it would start there.
OK, there's lots of hands. I'm going to try and get round as many of you as I can, sort of reasonably briefly. Anthony.
People don't want another review. They want to see change. That's why they're on the streets. That's why it's brought them out onto the streets to, like you said, 8 reviews, and what has changed for them? All that I see is that there's a lot of section of this nation getting disenfranchised with the whole scenario. They want to see change. And there are things that can be done. You know, they could teach the children about black history in school. They can introduce black culture and ethnic culture into the curriculum. It's their country. People have got to be made to feel like it's their country, but they're not.
Tony. So I will come back to you, Jane. Sorry, forgive me. I will allow you to come back in. Tony.
I'm afraid all this carries on. I have a right to my expression as well. And the black population puts itself about. The Black Lives Matter movement is excellent, but they do themselves no favours when they riot in London. There is plenty of government legislation for racial equality. The government have done a lot to try and make sure that we have racial equality. It's the people that get it wrong. And I'm afraid a lot of the time, the way that the Black Lives Matter movement conducts itself does them no good at all, does them no favours.
Well, Tony, as I'm sure you know, there was violence, but it was from a minority of people, and there were huge amounts of peaceful protests on the streets as well. Belinda.
Just listening to what James has been saying, and also some of the other audience members, you know, we do need to learn. We need to learn for all of the points that we've been discussing this evening. And like the audience member said about it's time for action. And just the previous comment then shows a certain element of ignorance about what is actually happening right now. As a teacher, you know, our curriculum changed and was reduced to become English heritage. And it's not just about black history that needs to be learned, it's about our history, our Anglo-centric history, warts and all, that needs to be learned from, but also needs to be put into learning now so that we don't have future generations with similar attitudes that will just perpetuate this.
Sue?
Stephen Lawrence was killed before my son was born, and he's graduated now. The McPherson report recommendations were not put into place. Grenfell was another case where we said this has to be a watershed and things have to change. We can go all the way back to Windrush Nothing is changing. Review after review after review. And we have peaceful Black Lives Matter demonstrations, and it's the white supremacists who turn up, if you like, who are causing the trouble at these demonstrations. But it's not individuals. This is institutional, and it goes through the whole of the UK society.
Steve, let me bring you back to Laura's original question. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister announced a review into racial inequality in the country. Is it now the time for action rather than just another review?
I absolutely think it's time for action. I mean, you know, we have some experience of this. We have a big academy with 212 boys in it at any one time. And, you know, there are many, many facets of this problem that we all accept exists. One of the biggest ones that I see is really based around social mobility. And the frustrating thing for me is that we all have it in our power to make a difference. You know, again, this is one of those things we can put to government, or we can make a change. And, you know, what I see in the boys that we've got is that they don't have, even if they're, you know, academically strong and bright, and they don't have the networks that we have. They don't get the opportunities that people in our network get. And all of the people that were involved in the protests, you know, from privileged side of the debate, if you like, can all make a difference. They all run companies, they own companies, they can give opportunities, whether it's work experience, internships, to help people along the road on the journey. And we can start making a difference now. We can all individually start making a difference tomorrow. And we know we can. And we don't need to wait for a government review to do it. The government review may help. It may come up with things that we can do with the police and to change attitudes. I certainly think, having looked at this whole issue of history and statues, that we need to review some things. You know, I think if we wouldn't put a statue up of that person now, why would we continue to have it? You know, do we want a statue to a man who brought 90,000 slaves into the country and killed 19,000 of them? You know, not for me. Whilst I think that there are people like Churchill who, although misguided in some beliefs at the time, overall were a force for good. So I'd like to see real change. I'd like to see us grasp the moment that we've got and have some kind of way that we bring about more equality, certainly in the workplace.
Jed?
I think Steve said so many important things there. And we've heard a lot of really great points as well. I'd like to maybe bring in a timely example, because there was a recent review which looked at the effects of COVID. And one of the troubling findings was about the vulnerability of certain ethnicities to coronavirus, specifically in terms of frontline healthcare staff. And I certainly think that an opportunity was missed to look at the risks that people are experiencing based on their ethnicity, and whether there should be redeployment of some staff, whether there should be changes in roles, and that should be factored in. As someone who's still got a lot of friends who are in the medical profession, some of whom are in those particularly vulnerable groups, I do worry that something should have been done, that review should have been acted upon, and I can't think of a better example in terms of the time we're at now.
Lisa?
Well, I was a bit concerned to hear Tony saying that the way that the Black Lives Matter protesters conduct themselves doesn't help their cause, because I've been tremendously inspired, actually, by a lot of the young people who've come out and taken to the streets in recent weeks. And I think that they're standing up and using their voice and the platform that they have in order to try and get change, while generation after generation have been failed. You know, James said, well, you know, what do you actually want to be done? But the government itself has sponsored 4 reviews in the last 4 years, which have made 201 recommendations. Those recommendations actually have common themes to them. It's about changing recruitment practices so we get far better representation at every level in the criminal justice system, in the workplaces and across society. It's about having a better education system so that people understand how discrimination actually works and understands the complexity of the history that we've got. It's about having better legal representation. It's about incomes as well. We were just talking about child poverty, but actually, if you're black, you're more likely to be poor, you're more likely to be stopped by the police. There are real disparities in the immigration system as well. These are things that should be well known to any politician of any party. And the key thing now is that we get on and implement them. You can see why people are so frustrated. And I'll just say this as well, is that my dad's generation were amongst those who fought for greater racial equality in this country, and they did make huge strides forward. And the way that they did it in the end was through leadership, people like Roy Jenkins, who stepped forward in order to bring in the Race Relations Act. Now, that was at a time when that was actually deeply controversial and pretty unpopular in Britain. What I would say to James is, I think that the government's inaction is based on a very dim view of people in this country. Most people in this country now strongly believe that discrimination harms all of us, even if we're not directly affected by it. We care about one another. We're a tolerant society, and the government really does need to get on and implement the recommendations from those reports, not just kick this into the long grass, because if we've learned anything over the last few weeks, it just will not cut it anymore.
James, I promise I'd let you back in.
Yeah, thank you. I am not, and I would never suggest that there isn't improvement that can be made. There's a huge amount of improvement that can be made. But to imply that we've not progressed is just factually wrong and deeply insulting. Steve and I grew up in southeast London, and although he's infinitely better looking, he's a couple of years older. I remember when the National Front marched through the streets virtually at the end of where I live. At the end of where I live. That
level of ambition.
That would never happen now. When I was first elected onto London Assembly, I sat next to an elected member of the British National Party, an explicitly racist political party, elected into London government by the voters of London. That would never happen now. When I was at school, I had no idea who Mary Sukell was, and my mum was a black nurse. My parents started going out when being a mixed-race couple would get you spat at in the street. That would never happen now. We have progressed so far, and there is, yes, definitely still room for improvement. But to deny the positive steps this country has made
James,
is deeply unfair. And you're suggesting that
matching that level of progress and that level of ambition. You know what needs to be done.
The point I'm making is, and again, I have mentored black people in business, black people in the civil service. We are moving in the right direction, and yes, we should always aspire to move further and faster, but we must never deny the progress that we've made. Otherwise, unsurprisingly, young black people in Britain will think that there has been no progress, and that's just wrong. It's wrong.
OK, Lisa, I am sure you want to come back in, but I'm afraid our hour is up. You're shaking your head there. Forgive me, Lisa, but I can't bring you back in. We are out of time. Tonight, our questions came from Plymouth. Thank you to all of you. And next week, which is the last in the current series, we are looking for an audience, a special audience of people under the age of 30. Remember that, folks? Actually, Munira, not so long ago for you, I'm sure. Anyway, and you can apply to be in our virtual audience if you are under the age of 30 from anywhere in the UK. So do get in touch. The way to do it is go to the website. You can apply in the usual way, as I say, at the Question Time website, and then we will get back in touch with you. And if you want to carry on tonight's discussion, you can, as always, every week, carry on that discussion with Adrian Charles and guests on Question Time Extra Time, and that is on 5 Live now. But I just want to say thank you very much to the panel, to all of you for coming here tonight. Lisa, thank you for joining us down the line. I know you're in that room because we can't hear your 5-year-old from there, and I can tell you we didn't hear your 5-year-old tonight. And, of course, to our audience in Plymouth, thank you to all of you for joining the programme. We're very grateful. It's a kind of flavour of what Question Time used to be like, and we'll get back there one day. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching. From Question Time. Bye-bye.
Assassination attempt.
We don't know yet.
Novichok.
In terms of protecting